Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is going to be devoted to a little slasher movie released in '86 called Slaughter High. Now, recently I've been focusing on some of the slasher movies from the Golden Age, the likes of The Funhouse, The Burning, The House on Sorority Row, which I think is a slasher movie that is very often overlooked. And I'm going to be focusing on, as I said, 1986's Slaughter High for this podcast. Now, Slaughter High is a bit of a contrast to the other slasher films I just talked about, because I actually believe they're some of the better slasher films from the era. Slaughter High is not one of them. Slaughter High is almost the other end of the spectrum. There's certainly worse than Slaughter High, but there's a hell of a lot better out there. As I said, it was released in '86. Its original title was to be April Fool's Day. That was its working title. But Paramount had actually acquired the name rights. And of course, their film, April Fool's Day, was released the very same year, '86. And this is nowhere near as good as Paramount's. I really do like 1986's April Fool's Day. I think it's a film that really kind of stands out from the crowd. I do believe it's quite a divisive film. It's one of the most divisive slasher films out there. Some people don't even see it as a true slasher film. I do. Now, Slaughter High, right off the bat, I'll admit, I only saw this film for the first time probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And, I knew the film existed. I'd seen the poster. I'd seen the box cover. I just never actually got round to watching it. And I watched it, and right off the bat, you can tell this film is cheesy. This film is really cheesy. It's certainly, I think, one of the cheesiest slasher flicks of the era. Right from the opening music, the theme to this film is really cheesy. And the score, it must be noted, is courtesy of Harry Manfredini, who's probably most well known for the Friday the 13th film, the Kill 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 Mamba, and he scored the Friday the 13th movies. And for anyone that's a Friday the 13th fan, you'll quickly notice that this movie uses much of Harry Manfredini's original Friday the 13th scores. He's basically reusing a lot of the stuff he did for Friday the 13th for this movie. The opening score, the main theme, is really cheesy. And this is actually an English film. This is a British movie, but it actually presents itself to be an American film. It was filmed entirely in London. And but the majority of the cast are actually English. I believe there's at least a couple of American actors in this film, but the majority are British, putting on American accents to varying degrees. There's some really bad accents in this film. I mean, overall, the acting, at the end of the day, we don't watch these films to see, Oscar-worthy performances, do we? But yeah, the performances in this film are pretty bad, and the dialogue and all that. But, if you can kind of get beyond the cheesiness of it, and, some people would say that's part of the charm of these kind of films and that. There's, for example, a lot of people listening might have heard of a big British soap called Emmerdale. There's actually an actor in that was in it for years. He's actually one of the teens in this film. Well, I say teens, they're clearly a lot older than the characters they're playing, which is very often the case of these from these films. And he puts on a really bad American accent, and it's really weird seeing him try to speak like an American. So yeah, it was. I do kind of like the setting for the film. It's essentially at its core, it's a revenge tale, like so many slasher films before it. A prank goes horribly wrong. The character of Marty is very much kind of a loner, a dweeb, if you will, and they pull a prank on him. It goes wrong, and he's out to get revenge. And coincidentally, his birthday is April Fool's Day, April the 1st, and he gets revenge on them one by one. They have a reunion 10 years later. It's quite funny, really. It's been 10 years, but no character looks different in the slightest way. They all look exactly the same 10 years later, and it's quite funny because there's a janitor in the movie that was at the school years ago and he actually says to one of the guys, "I recognise you, I know you from somewhere," and I'm thinking, Of course you recognise him. He looks exactly the same. Nothing about him has changed whatsoever. But yeah, this janitor actually is the first victim in the movie. Now, the teens show up and they're being bumped off one by one. That whole kind of, Agatha Christie-esque, and then there were none kind of vibe in that. I quite like the setting for this film. It's basically, I think the interior of the high school was a condemned grammar school that was actually set to be demolished. But the exterior was actually an abandoned mental asylum as well. I like some of the little shots you get here and there of kind of the kind of abandoned hallways, the corridors and that. And I will say this, now, Simon Scudamore, that actually played the killer in this movie, may rest in peace. He actually died at the age of 28. I believe it was an intentional drug overdose. And he died, I believe, towards the end of filming during this movie. And so for the final shots of the film, it's not actually him playing the killer. They got someone else to... I believe it was one of the crew members that actually took over the role of Marty for the end. I actually really like the mask in this film. I think the mask is quite creepy. The whole kind of jester mask. I do really like the look of the killer in this film. Now, the deaths themselves, this is a film that actually does have a pretty high body count as slasher movies go. I believe there's 10 people. I believe there's 10 victims in this movie. And yeah, again, it's kind of... it's so silly. The thing is, one of the deaths, for example, it's kind of like, look, you've just found a dead body, all right? Somebody's clearly in there killing people one by one. What do? You get blood all over you. What do? You go and take a bath. You take a leisurely bath. Not just a quick wash. You actually sit in the bath, and yeah. At the end of the day, these characters are in these films to be killed and stuff, but it's completely nonsensical, and it's kind of an acid bath as well. Acid starts coming out the tap. I'd love to know how Marty made that happen. He'd have to tinker with the waterworks, etc., and whatever, and, just hope that somebody actually takes a bath. And then, of course, there's actually the second death of the movie as well. A character takes a beer can, and it's acid, his insides start erupting. And the thing is, this is a film with a really small budget, so it's kind of like the practical effects aren't exactly kind of, top notch. This isn't, Tom Savini level or anything like that. But I just love to know. It's a death that kind of stands out. You don't see deaths like that too often in slasher films and stuff. But you kind of think, how the hell did he get it in the can? How does this even work? With the janitor's death, now Marty looks like he probably weighs about 125 pounds. He's pretty thin. Yet he seems to have Michael Myers / Jason Voorhees-esque strength. He actually picks up the janitor, completely off the floor and then impales him. It's a very kind of Friday the 13th Halloween-esque death. But I'm like, how? How, is he seriously been working out? Because he certainly doesn't look like it. And one of the highlights for me, one of the deaths in this film, is the electric bed. A 2-for-1 death, two characters being killed together. I just find that scene so funny. Like with Friday the 13th Part 2, the double impalement. Michael Myers putting the spear through both of them on the bed. This is that kind of like death, but it's just so funny. It's quite shocking, actually. Excuse the pun. It's certainly a death that kind of stands out and that. And then there's kind of like, there's one woman, she does what must be the most laughably bad run I've seen in slasher movies. She does a little bit of a run and she falls straight into a pit that's basically, it's got kind of like sewage and that coming out of it. And she manages to climb to the top, and then Marty just pushes her down again with his foot and then walks off. And I'm like, well, she's not dead. So, surely she can just climb out of that again? Presumably she survives now. Of course, the twist, if you want to call it that, which is always, I think, a massive cop-out, 99% of the time, is it was a dream. Marty's getting revenge on all of these teens. I keep calling them teens, but they're clearly much older than the characters they're playing. He gets revenge on them all, and it actually turns out to be a dream. Yeah, he's in the hospital and then he escapes, and presumably he's going to go out on his killing rampage now. Always kind of a cop out, but in a movie like this, it's just kind of like you just accept it. You just accept it. This isn't trying to be like, too clever or anything like that. It is what it is. And, when he's actually... And that's the thing with this movie as well. There isn't actually a final girl as such, because he actually manages to kill all of them. He actually kills all of his intended victims, which you don't actually see often in films of this subgenre. But then, of course, they actually come back as ghosts and start haunting him. And it's really cheesy. It's really kind of like bad, but... And then they're coming back as ghosts, and they're basically like got their faces painted up grey. They actually very much look like the zombies from 1978's Dawn of the Dead. That's what they're very kind of reminiscent of. So yeah, with Marty, being the killer in this film. I mean, the thing is, obviously, they do this prank on him. He thinks he's going to get it on with a girl. And with Caroline Munro. And it must be mentioned that Caroline Munro, very established actress, in fact. Obviously she was in everything from like Dracula AD 1972 to The Spy Who Loved Me in 77, which is actually my favourite Roger Moore Bond movie. Very established actress. She was actually 35 years old, playing a high school teenager. And it's really noticeable that she is considerably older than a lot of the other cast members in this film. And obviously, what's, become very much a staple of the slasher genre is, the kind of hide and chase sequences, if you will. And there is a very kind of extended chase sequence towards the end of this film. And from what I understand, that was kind of filmed almost last minute because they didn't have enough material with which to fill out the film, to pad out the movie. And that, so to kind of achieve the running time that they were going for, they extended this whole kind of this chase sequence. But yeah, getting back to like the prank himself, obviously he thinks he's going to get it on. They're all in there, they're ready to film him, etc. And we actually get something that you don't see too often, and that's full frontal nudity. We don't get to see that in slasher films too often. Simon Scudamore's penis is actually on screen for a few seconds. And then, of course, as if that's not enough, they dump his head down the toilet. And what really makes me laugh is when they get caught. Okay, one of the teens actually says, she was like, "Oh my God, Marty, this is all Marty's fault." And I'm thinking, how is this Marty's fault? He didn't ask for these pranks to be pulled on him. He's not the one that wanted his head put down the toilet or whatever. How the hell is it his fault? As I said, the characters in this film, no one really stands out. There's no, in some of these slasher films, you do get characters here and there that do kind of stand out. There's no one in this film that stands out. The dialogue is pretty bad. As I said, mainly a British cast, putting on American accents, some worse than others. But it's not a film that takes itself seriously. It's a slasher movie that very much goes through all the conventions and tropes that we've become accustomed to. And as I said, if you're a Friday the 13th fan, you'll recognise all of the Harry Manfredini music in this. So I think for anyone that's kind of a slasher movie completionist, I think it's worth a watch. But obviously it's just not one of the best. But there are worse. There are actually worse. This is kind of a guilty pleasure kind of film. Because, I actually think as slasher movies go, it kind of has some merit, I suppose, with some kind of memorable kills, as cheesy and as, nonsensical as they are. And I really do kind of like the mask. As I said, I really do like the mask that the killer actually wears in this film. But, it's... I mean, you can't even compare it to April Fool's Day, the Paramount movie. They're very different. I mean, they're both set on April Fool's Day and that, but they're very different beasts when it comes to... I think April Fool's Day is actually one of the most underrated slasher films from the Golden Age. I think it's a film that what makes it stand out from the crowd is the twist ending that I'm pretty certain that, I don't think you need to be Sherlock Holmes to kind of work out, what direction that film's going in. The title of the movie pretty much gives it away, I'd say. But at the same time, I think April Fool's Day is just one that stands out from the crowd. But yeah, with Slaughter High, I know that the producers had actually. I mean, the thing is, right? It's an it is a British movie pretending to be American. It's kind of like you ask yourself why. I think it's just simply due to the fact of, 95% of slasher films released within this time were typically North American movies. They were Canadian or American. And some of these films, there were some of these movies that certainly went on to attain fan bases and become commercial successes. And I think Slaughter High just wanted to be one of them films. It just wanted to follow the trend and be an American slasher film, despite not being one. I mean, it's very hokey. As I said, the dialogue and stuff. There's nothing in this film that's really kind of like believable to it. I really do feel bad for Simon Scudamore. I know that the director in that thought that maybe the making the movie, etc., had actually proved to be too stressful and it contributed to his depression. But according to his mother, he said he absolutely loved it. And I believe he said it was something like, it was like the highlight of his life, just making a film. Because I believe that was the only film he ever actually starred in. So, yeah. I think Slaughter High, I'm not going to say it's an underrated slasher film. I'm not even going to say it's, kind of a hidden gem or an overlooked film or whatever. But if you are into cheesy, kind of like nonsensical slasher flicks and all that, ones that really don't take themselves seriously, then I'd say Slaughter High is actually worth a watch. I mean, it's just kind of like, they get to the location, for example, as well. They get to the location during the film and the storm starts. One of the oldest cliches in the history of horror movies, as far as I'm concerned, the storm starts. There's no rain or anything, but obviously using a storm machine and all that. And, it's just kind of cheesy fun. And I believe also, as well, is that it's the only film, as of 2018, I think Japan was, now this may have actually changed since then, but as of 2018, I think Japan was the only country to actually have a home video release of this film under the title of April Fool's Day. Most people know this for being Slaughter High. But as I said, its original title was to be April Fool's Day. There is actually, because I did watch it again quite recently for the first time in years, and there is actually a poster of Pieces, which is actually a Spanish slasher movie, a guilty pleasure of mine. I think Pieces is like a bad film, but I can't help it. It's kind of a fun bad film, if that makes any sense. It's really kind of trashy, and that it doesn't try to be anything else other than what it is, and I kind of enjoy it. And there's actually a poster of Pieces actually seen in the movie very briefly. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I really wanted to say regarding Slaughter High. It doesn't actually have a Blu-ray release. I do actually own it on DVD. It's currently on Arrow on their streaming app at the moment. But yeah, as I said, just kind of a dumb, fun slasher flick that really wastes no time in showing you how cheesy it is. From the opening theme by Harry Manfredini, it's a really kind of cheesy score. And yeah. But not as I said, not one of the worst slasher films I've ever seen. I've certainly seen a lot worse than this. But yeah, anyway, that's pretty much all I really wanted to talk about today. So yeah, if you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Talk and Stalk. Every subscription is massively appreciated. I do actually have a fellow friend and YouTuber who his website is entertainmenttalk.org. If you're interested in checking out some TV film reviews. And Dean Mallison, a friend of mine who also does short films and stop motion films as well. Dean Mallison Films, that's Mallison. Dean Mallison Films and Dean Mallison Stop Motion. So they're worth checking out. So thanks again for everyone that listened, and I'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. Take care.